Coming up on today's Locked On Big Ten, yesterday I gave you my takes on what happened between Michigan and Wisconsin and the suspensions that resulted. Today, Isaiah Hole is in from Locked On Wolverines to break it down a little bit more. What did he think about what happened and the suspensions that resulted? And of course, most importantly, what does this mean for Michigan basketball after a big win yesterday? That's right now here on Locked On Big Ten.
You are Locked On Big Ten, your daily podcast on the Big Ten Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into today's Locked On Big Ten. Nate Dickinson with you here. Today's show is brought to you by Run Your Pool. March Madness is just around the corner, so you can use Run Your Pool to make sure that your bracket pool goes smoothly. I'll tell you more about the details with Run Your Pool later on. Coming up on today's show, again, Isaiah Hole is in to really just break down everything we've seen from the Michigan Wolverines over the last week. Juwan Howard's out for the rest of the regular season. Of course, we haven't talked to him since what gave him that suspension happened over the weekend. And we got to, of course, talk about the future for the Wolverines. How big of a hit is not having Howard going to be? And how can Michigan, of course, still secure a spot in the field of 68 with this speed bump? Of course, Wolverines picked up a big win yesterday to help that cause. Let's get into that as we go over the games and results from last night. The two games we have to tell you about: number 13, Wisconsin, was on the road at Minnesota. We mentioned it could be a good one yesterday, and it was. Wisconsin wins, but just barely by a single point, 68-67. The final, Minnesota had a 3 at the end there, so it wasn't like things were really down to the last second, but still, a 1-point victory for Wisconsin. Minnesota puts up a good effort. And then also in the premier matchup in the Big Ten of the evening, Michigan at home, desperate for a win, facing off against another tournament team and a hot one at that in Rutgers, picked up the win without their head coach, without Musa Diabate, without Terrence Williams. It was an impressive win for the Wolverines, and now Michigan gets those players back with a win attached to the game that they had without him. And also, of course, Michigan is able to help out their tournament case as well with that W. We'll get to the tournament cases for everyone and the latest from Joe Lunardi now as we continue along here and open up the show. Michigan is, with that win over Rutgers, up 2 out of the last 4 in. They're now in that next section, the last 4 byes, teams that don't have to play in the play-in tournament, which of course matters a whole bunch to Michigan, I'm sure. And now Indiana has fallen in to those last 4 teams in. They were there yesterday, now sitting at the second to last team in. Joe Lunardi noted in his latest release of his field of 68 that Indiana would likely need to win a very important game tonight at home against Maryland to be able to stay in that field of 68. Also, the field got a little bit smaller. Lunardi pointed out yesterday that with Northern Iowa taking the tiebreaker in its conference, that now bumps down Loyola Chicago to an at-large bid, at least in his projections right now. And that would be one less at-large team for these Big Ten teams to try and get a bid from. So it'll be interesting as things go down. The bubble's likely not going to get any bigger. It'll probably shrink down a little bit more, maybe even. But we'll see with those surprises and everything else. Can the Big Ten get those 9 teams in? That's the big question as we get into and closer to Selection Sunday here on the show. I'm interested to see how Lunardi has it all playing out as some of these games start to play out. Again, the games on the schedule for tonight, I already mentioned, a big one between Maryland and Indiana for the Hoosiers. At home, it's been sliding down the NCAA tournament picture. Needs to try and find a grip. Losing to Maryland would be a big blemish on that resume. Of course, Hoosiers still in the field, as we just mentioned, right now. Bigger game going on later tonight as far as tournament implications. These two teams, Ohio State and Illinois, already in, both in the top 25. But of course, the positioning matters. As of right now, Ohio State number 22. Illinois stands at number 15. So this will be a big game for whoever wins it. Coming up here on today's show, Michigan picked up a big win yesterday. We're going to talk to Isaiah Hole about that win, also playing without Juwan Howard, and, well, everything that happened to make that happen. What was his take about the Wisconsin-Michigan scuffle, the resulting suspensions, and everything that happened with that situation? We'll have it for you in just a minute here on Locked On Big Ten. Well, March Madness is only a couple of weeks away, so if you're getting ready to get a bracket pool going, you really need to start thinking about it now. If you've run pools before, you know that it takes a lot of time and you need to start thinking about it now. But it doesn't have to be as stressful if right now, when you're thinking about it, you head on over to runyourpool.com. This is a place, quite honestly, that's like a lot of other places online. There are plenty of spots where you can fill out your brackets, but runyourpool.com is the best. You've done your research. You can do what everyone else is doing, or you can get that little bit extra out of there. It has standard brackets, survivor pools for the NCAA tournament, new ways to play than you've ever played before. If you're just a little bored of doing the straight up picking teams through the tournament, if you've got a business and you run a pool at work every year, it can streamline the process of making sure everyone's in that wants to be in, play alongside employees or customers. They offer full-time support if anything does go wrong while you're on the website. And again, this is the place to go. We believe in Run Your Pool because, like I said, you're running the brackets there ourselves. Locked On is. There's no truer test than that. If you want to play against us for a shot at a cash prize, you can do that as well. Join us at runyourpool.com/lockedon. While you're there, create your own pool for your friends and family and enter our code PureMadness at checkout for $10 off your pool as well. All the rules and details are available online as well. That's runyourpool.com/lockedon for your chance to win a big cash prize here playing against us. You're listening into Locked On Big Ten, everything you need to know about the conference every day of the week. Alongside Isaiah Hull, I'm Nate Dickinson, the host of Locked On Wolverines, here to talk to us a little bit about what the situation is now going forward with Michigan after we have all of the dust settled after what happened between Wisconsin and Michigan over the weekend. Isaiah, it's been a little while since this obviously happened, but I do want to get your take on what happened between Juwan Howard and the Wisconsin coaching staff there at the end. We broke it down, I think, a little bit too much. I talked about it during Monday's show, but what was your takeaway about like the actual exchange and what went down and what Howard did?
Well, first off, I mean, it regardless of what happened, I mean, it was inexcusable. I mean, you can't put your hands on someone else. You just can't do it, especially if you're the head coach. I now that we've kind of been able to Zapruder the film a bit, I think it's understandable, you know, in the sense of why it happened. I'm kind of shocked that Joe Klabenhoff he didn't get anything when it came down to like that guard got a $10,000 fine, and that Klabenhoff I thought was more than deserving of some kind of fine or suspension, because even though tensions were already raised, things were kind of starting to get out of hand anyway. The fact that Juwan struck him, that was no accident. It was because he kind of inserted himself and got his hands on a player, and that's always going to get Juwan to react in that type of way, kind of like a father bear, you know. So again, I'm not saying it's excusable. It isn't, but it makes sense why things escalated the way they did, and really that was the big. It wasn't necessarily the initial inciting moment of everything. Of course, there was the press, there was the timeout, there was the press again, all that kind of stuff that raised the tensions between Juwan Howard and Greg Gard grabbing him, which that also I understand where Greg Gard's coming from, right? Like he thought he had a very congenial relationship with Juwan. Some people, when they're angry, they don't react in a way that you expect. And I think that's kind of what happened with Juwan. I think that he thought, when Juwan said, I'll remember this, you look at Greg Gard's face, you can see that he was perplexed and, trying to get a handle on the situation. But the way that he went about it, unfortunately, as well-meaning as he might've been in that moment, was all it did was escalate everything. And then from there, obviously things got out of hand. But if you're Juwan Howard, obviously his players love what he did in the sense of they feel like he was defending them in that moment, but you still have to be above the fray, because if Juwan does nothing, maybe there's a reprimand, but certainly there would have been stiffer penalties for Wisconsin. Wisconsin wouldn't have gotten away. Not that Wisconsin got away with it, but like their statement that they released after the suspensions and fines were handed down, which got pretty much mass ridicule from what I could see. and not just from the Michigan media and Michigan fans and everybody. It seemed like nationally that got a lot of flack, but nonetheless, it's an inexcusable moment. It could have cost Juwan his job. I'm glad it didn't, in the sense of it looked bad. It was bad. It wasn't quite that Woody Hayes Clemson player moment that some wanted to kind of make it into, or I had said in the immediate aftermath, the malice at the palace. And even though it reminded me of that in some ways, it certainly wasn't anywhere close to that. But nonetheless, I mean, he's got to be better if you're going to be the head coach of a major college basketball team. You've got to have a little bit more composure, and you've got to keep your hands to yourself. Insert yourself in there if you need to, or push him back. Don't hit him in the face. If you just pushed him back, and then, I mean, it probably would have escalated a little bit, but it wouldn't have become what it became from that point forward.
Yeah, I agree with really everything you're saying. My view on it was like, end of the game, Howard's upset, but it seemed like he was ready to just like, I'm going to give him the cold shoulder on this handshake line, and then we're just going to get out of here. He seemed like kind of ready to let it go. Guard grabs him again, like you said, whatever that means as far as malintent there. Then, of course, that's one escalation. Howard escalates, but then I agree. It was Joe, I'm missing last name, Klabnoff?
Yeah, Joel Klabnoff.
Okay, yeah. He comes in, and I agree. I feel like he was easily a third aggressor in there, whether it was him getting hit by Howard or not. And then you called it with Wisconsin playing that victim card heavy after that game. It was kind of weird to see. And again, everyone did call him out on it. So that was actually a little bit of a refreshing thing to be able to come out of everyone's criticism. I want to talk about going forward now, because this is now obviously Juwan Howard out for the rest of the regular season. We see penalties for players who I assuming I haven't looked through the tape, but were the ones who were actually like seen throwing punches for a game. What's the situation like for Michigan going forward now, at least on the court, with this next one game and then 5 games for Howard?
Well, they've got the one game out of the way already. That happened last night against Rutgers, and they managed to have a 9-point win over the Scarlet Knights at home. So they did so, obviously being very shorthanded. Got Kobe Buffkin and Frankie Collins stepped up. I mean, still the bench only got 7 points. Michigan's bench hasn't exactly been great, but at least now you welcome back Terrence Williams and Moussa Diabate this upcoming weekend, and it's at least that now that that's out of the way. But it didn't seem to affect them that poorly. I mean, considering they got run off the court when they played at what do you call it now? Jersey Mike's Arena or whatever it is. You used to be calling it the Rack, but and they basically did it and turned to Rutgers. Okay defense, wasn't like super stellar. Rutgers shot 43%, but it was good enough. And the offense with the shots falling, really big performance by Caleb Houston helped them out there. So while it's those, you count on a starter and Moussa Diabate. I mean, he's still a freshman. He's still been streaky and kind of the same even for sophomore Terrence Williams. But I mean, he's your sixth man coming off the bench, really. So it went well. So it's just a matter of seeing how it continues with Phil Martelli leading the charge now that welcome those 2 players back this weekend.
Now, we talked about on the show, or at least I've started to try and get into, the Big Ten had this kind of odd situation where obviously this is something that can't be excused. It has to be disciplined and honestly very seriously. But at the same time, it's also the Big Ten's job to get Michigan into the NCAA tournament, right? So on those kind of balance of things, I was looking at the suspensions and thinking, all right, you got Juwan Howard out for the regular season. So you can point to and say, you know what, we punished that guy. That's going to affect this team. But as far as the players on the court, you had, like you said, guys out for 1 game. They're back now. It seems like the Big Ten did a pretty good job covering its tracks while at the same time doing as little as it could to actually affect the play on the court for Michigan and give them a chance to get in. I'm just kind of going over what's been going through my head, but what do you think about just how the Big Ten handled this with the context of it wants to be that 9th tournament team in that field of 68 out of this conference?
Well, I think the punishments for the Michigan side were fair. Again, out of my surprise of the suspensions not levied, number 0 for Wisconsin, he's the one who threw the first punch. The other two that got suspended for Michigan, they were responding in kind based off of if you go and watch the video. That's not what I thought when it unfolded. When it unfolded, I just saw, haymakers being thrown by Moussa Diabate and Terrence Williams. And but if you go back and look, it was number 0 who threw the first punch. So I think that's I'm surprised that he had no repercussions. And as far as it goes for Michigan, I think one game was certainly within the realm of fair, kind of just given how everything unfolded. I mean, especially when the head coaches, you don't want to call it a punch per se, because it was a strike. I think that's a fair. A
lot of people have been saying the slap's actually more offensive than if he had punched him. But
either way, with the fact that started things, I don't think you can fault players too much for getting into the fray when it comes to that. But that's what your head coach is doing. But it's I think one game is absolutely appropriate for those guys. And obviously Michigan has a capable interim head coach in Phil Martelli, who's done that job for decades at St. John's, and he got a win again last night. So but I mean, it's still a big blow regardless. I mean, not having Juwan, considering this stretch, is brutal. I mean, you've got Iowa, Michigan State, Ohio State, and I can't remember the other one in there, but it's a brutal stretch. So regardless, I mean, it still hurts, but if Michigan can get, I think, one more quad 1 win, now having after taking down Rutgers, who isn't quad 1, but still it's a good win, I think that that would do it. And considering what Michigan State's been lately, if Michigan can get that win, that would probably be the one that would really put Michigan up over the top. So I think the Big Ten was fair is when it came to the Michigan side of things. As I said, it's more the Wisconsin side of things, kind of downplaying their culpability and everything that happened. I'm not saying that they deserve a ton. I just think that if those two actors that I've mentioned, in Klabenhoff and number 0 for Wisconsin, I think that's where I think things are maybe a little unfair, because I think that they deserved something for their part.
Yeah, you talk about how everyone was clowning them for being so defensive on that right after it happened, but it did, I guess, work at least a little bit, right? Not letting those guys get off. Tell us a little bit more about just kind of the style of Martelli before we go. What's the differences in what we'll see out of this Michigan basketball team, or have already seen through the one game, as we get through this regular season? And as you said, they have plenty of chances here to be safely in that field of 68 by the time Howard gets back.
It's a little hard to tell per se, but because I didn't exactly go back and watch any St. John's, but as far as what happened yesterday, he decided to employ a bit of run and gun to try to counteract the not Wisconsin, but Rutgers half court defense. And it seemed to work. And anytime that Michigan slowed down, Rutgers managed to force a lot of turnovers. I mean, they had 6 steals or 8 steals in the game yesterday. That's kind of what they do. And to negate that, they went fast. So clearly he's operating kind of similar to what Juwan would, in the sense of looking at that personnel on both sides and trying to find exploits and change things up. And clearly run and gun for this year's team, that's a different tactic. I mean, we haven't really seen a lot of that. I mean, in previous years, we've seen with Juwan that they'll play you any way that you want to be played, or any way that you can be played. And that's Martelli has kind of brought that back, even though we haven't really seen that particular tactic employed this year.
You're watching on YouTube, you're getting a treat. I've had to turn off the AC a minute ago. Kat just hopped up on the desk, but Isaiah's been a pro in charging through it all. So if you're only listening to the audio podcast, you'd have no idea, except for what I think may have been a little meow that got in on the microphone there. But thank you, as always, for checking in with us, Isaiah, on everything going on with Michigan after what has been a big week for the Wolverines. No doubt about that. I mean, I guess hopefully maybe something a little less eventful for us to discuss next time around when you're back. I don't know. We'll see.
Probably. I think Michigan football is in spring practice right now, so I'm assuming that will probably be the next topic.
Well, we'll obviously have plenty to get into. It's weird. Wolverines just can't get out of the news right now. Harbaugh stuff, all this going on. But hey, all press is good press, maybe. See. Isaiah Hull again with Locked On Wolverines. If you want to keep up with all the crazy stuff going on with Michigan every weekday, he is over there on the pod Monday through Friday. And of course, plenty of stuff going for him to talk about with all sorts of different people and people who know Michigan stuff just as much as you do, maybe. I don't know.
Depends on the week. Although we've been very light this week due to some personal stuff, but we'll be back either today or tomorrow.
Of course. So yeah, listen in to Locked On Wolverines. Subscribe if you're a Michigan fan and need to know what's going on there. Isaiah, thanks as always for coming on. We'll have you again back here next week to talk more.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
All right, awesome.